Good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching Plain Speak with me, Shivani Gupta. This could well be a precursor to a watershed moment in Indian post-colonial history. Whichever way it may go, but the fact that the Supreme Court has decided to review the Places of Worship Act 1991 by a 3-judge bench today opens up a Pandora's box that was sought to be closed and buried, but that has remained difficult to bury. Because the Places of Worship Act is an important component of the civilizational battle India has been facing. India, that had been subjugated for 1,000 years, first by religious marauders and then by colonialists, has been wanting to break free of those shackles even after 75 years of independence and restore what was its original ancient cultural heritage. The Places of Worship Act bars the conversion of any place of worship into that of any other denomination or religion post from what it was on 15th August 1947, basically on Independence Day. But in a country where thousands of temples were either completely destroyed or partially taken over, is this act not arbitrary? Is it not disproportionately discriminatory to Hindus and other Indic faiths that were targeted by foreigners for a millennia? Does this act not effectively allow illegal occupation of religious sites even post-independence, but that too retrospectively from 1991, just to suit political purposes? Is this act not a way to keep the truth buried instead of facing it and reclaiming it? Does any nation and its people deserve this, especially those who have undergone, as I said, 1,000 years of subjugation? These are the larger questions we will take to our guests in just a bit. But first up, Maharaja Kumari Krishna Priya is the daughter of Kashi Naresh Vibhuti Narayan Singh, who is the current titular head of the erstwhile royal family of Kashi. She had filed an intervention application contending that as the former ruler of the princely state of Kashi was the chief patron of all temples in the city, it is the royal family's duty and right to seek reclamation of the illegal structure that were built, razing old temples in the city. This is only the latest in a long line of challenges to the Places of Worship Act, pending for a long time in courts too. But take a look at this latest petition. In this petition, she has argued that this act is a textbook instance of a legislation passed in the most undemocratic of manners, without any regard for fundamental rights of the affected parties, in particular the right of the formerly colonized indigenous communities to seek reclamation of occupied religious come civilizational sites. She also goes on to argue that it is shocking that a government of an independent, formerly colonized country deemed it fit to enact a legislation which places an embargo on the reclamation of occupied religious sites of indigenous and Bharatiya systems. This petition also says, and it's a very strong one, that this is also a textbook example of oikophobia or oikomisia or misogyny, that is hatred or contempt of one's own people and culture. Further, it says that this act actively stands in the way of the truth being laid bare through constitutional means before a court of law through evidence which is legally admissible. And finally, it says every time the truth is brushed under the carpet ostensibly in the name of secularism, it contributes to communal disharmony. So it's actually against the very idea of this act. Here is what transpired today though. There are several petitioners and some opposing it as well. Jamiat Ulama-i-Hind is opposing the petitions challenging the act. It said in court that the Supreme Court judgment in Ayodhya case upholds the constitutional validity of this law. Advocate Ashwini Upadhyay, one of the petitioners through his lawyer, argued that Ayodhya case observation are obiter dicta, not legally binding as precedent. Subramanian Swami, another petitioner, said Ayodhya-like exemption should be given to Kashi Mathura temples at least. Kashi royal family lawyer argued that giving exemptions only to Ayodhya is discriminatory in nature, as was done under the 1991 Act. Advocate Vishnu Jain, who's representing the Vishwabhadra Pujari Purohit Mahasangh, has said that right for judicial review cannot be taken away as a larger challenge to this act. And finally, the Supreme Court agreed for a review. It has also asked the centre to file a response within 2 weeks. Now, the Places of Worship Act, what are the main contentions against it? That it limits judicial review, as I just mentioned, which is a basic feature and tenet of the Constitution. It also imposes an arbitrary, irrational, retrospective cut-off date, which is Independence Day. It abridges the right to religion of Hindus, Jains, Buddhists and Sikhs, in other words, the Indic faiths. Another argument that is made is that no study was undertaken before passing this law to even identify the number of such pending disputes. And many of those cases could have actually been entitled to the exemption that was eventually given only to Ram Janmabhoomi. And this law was passed when the Ram Janmabhoomi movement by the BJP was at its peak. Also, procedurally, 7 days' notice was not given to the MPs before the bill was introduced in Parliament and passed within 3 days. This act is definitely mired and driven out of politics of the time, but there are also pure legal arguments against it. These are some of those. That this act violates the Hindus, Jains, Buddhists, Sikhs' right to follow religion at their historical sites. There's also Article 13 of the Indian Constitution that prohibits any law which takes away the right to justice, dignity, the right to pray and profess your religion. It violates the right to restore, manage, maintain and administer places of worship and pilgrimage under Article 26. And the final legal argument against this act also is that it violates the right to restore and preserve the script and culture under Article 29. The act was brought by the Congress government of Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao at a time when the Ram Temple movement was at its peak. The Babri Masjid was still standing, but L.K. Advani's Rath Yatra, his arrest in Bihar and the firing on car sevaks in UP had raised communal tensions. Now here is what was said at the time. Then Home Minister S.P. Chauhan had said, it is considered necessary to adopt these measures in view of the controversies arising from time to time with regard to conversion of places of worship which tend to vitiate communal atmosphere. Adoption of this bill, he said, will effectively prevent any new controversies from arising. But is that really the right thing to do as justice is concerned? BJP MP at the time, Uma Bharti, had led the party's opposition. She had said maintenance of status quo as in 1947 in respect of religious places is like closing eyes similar to that of pigeons against advancement of cats. This will mean preservation of tensions for the coming generation. So in fact, the argument against this act has been that actually if you want to preserve harmony, this act does not do that. It just prolongs the battles. She even referred to the Kashi Vishwanath Temple Gyanvapi Mosque dispute, which is also currently in vogue, saying, was not the intention of Aurangzeb behind leaving remnants of the temple he destroyed at the site of mosque to keep reminding Hindus of their historical fate and to remind coming generations of Muslims of their past glory and power. And that's the larger Hindu argument, that these sites, the destruction of these holy temples cannot be allowed to be maintained because it's a reminder of the subjugation that foreign invaders wanted to do of the Indic population. So the big debate that's coming up today, is this act not discriminatory in its very nature? Is it not discriminatory disproportionately against one section of the public versus the other? First up, BJP leader and one of the petitioners in this case, Subramanian Swamy, is joining us live. Thanks a lot for your time. I want to begin by asking you, the fact that the Supreme Court has allowed a review of the Places of Worship Act by a 3-judge bench, a lot of these petitions were pending for a long time, but the fact that this is happening now, do you see this as a big moment in this fight against this act?
Well, you know, there are two kinds of petitions. One is which I have filed, and I filed it about a year ago during the corona, has now come up. And then others who had filed it earlier. Now, the difference between me and the others is that I have basically said that the criteria that was used for keeping the Ram Mandir from the application of this act would also apply to Kashi Vishwanath and Mathura.
Okay.
Although 40,000 temples have been demolished during the Muslim period, these can be constructed anywhere. But these three that I mentioned of Ram Mandir, Mathura Mandir of Krishna and the Kashi Vishwanath Temple, they can't be built anywhere else except that place where we by faith believe either Ram was born or Krishna was born or Shiva had planted the Jyotirling. So these three have to be restored. All three were demolished. Two of them by Aurangzeb, that is Mathura and Kashi Vishwanath, and the other one was by Babur. So once these three are restored, and the Muslims agree to move their masjids to some other place, I think the remaining part of the 40,000 can be forgotten.
Okay.
That is what we are trying to do from one. I think this is what the RSS also has said. This is what all the sadhus and sannyasis of our country have said. But somehow some people are hell-bent that this should be for all the temples that have been demolished during the Muslim period.
But those people argue that there is no such act like this anywhere in the world, and you cannot take away the rights to justice or to go to court to relook at a period of history. Overall, the arguments against this act, do you find them strong enough? Because there may be some smaller disputes versus the bigger ones that you're talking about, but shouldn't those locals also have the right to figure out the truth and reclaim those sites?
No, see, the question is whether the temple should be built on the same spot, or and only then it will be a temple, or it can be built somewhere else. As I told you, these three, there is no anywhere else. But the other 39,997 temples, which were demolished during the Muslim period, they can be built elsewhere. Now, it's a question of bringing a closure to this Hindu-Muslim issue.
Okay.
Muslims are no more in majority. There are no Mughals left anywhere. I mean, I can't even trace the future for a later generation of the Muslims emperors. So this is a now 80% Hindu country. Should we not call it an end? And I think it would be the proper thing to do to say that the three temples should be rebuilt,
and forget about the rest.
The remaining we will build elsewhere nearby.
Okay. But let me ask you a larger question. Don't you find that this entire law in itself is bad in law? There are constitutional arguments against it.
Well, it is a law passed by Parliament, and I think we have a challenge on the constitutionality of the Act. But I think the mood I get is that first of all, it is still a controversial thing whether it is a constitutionally violative or not, and ultimately will depend on the discretion of the judges. And I would think that that if we abolish the Act itself or declare it unconstitutional, there will be a law and order situation.
So you're saying that if this act is repealed, there could be a law and order situation. But, you know, Mr. Swami, that's ultimately at the heart of this discussion. How long, in order to maintain peace, are we going to continue to do what is seemingly disproportionately discriminatory against one side? That's the argument many make, principally to oppose this act in the first place. That you cannot bury truth to maintain peace. That's not a lasting peace. For peace to be lasting, you have to look in the eye of the truth, reclaim what you can, talk about it, discuss it, and then maybe bygones can be bygones.
No, we are not going to hide the truth. This question is whether you have to build the temple on the same spot. That is the issue. No, we will publicize it very much. But that doesn't mean that you have to teach the Muslims a lesson by building it in the same place. Yes, if there was a religious edict or a religious law by which we have to, like in the case of Ram Mandir or Ram Janmabhoomi Mandir or Krishna Janmabhoomi Mandir or the Kashi Vishwanath Mandir, yes, then of course we'll take a firm stand. But not that we should build the temple again at the same spot because we want to teach the Muslims a lesson.
Okay. Okay, I leave it at that. Whether this is being done with an intention to teach anybody a lesson or with an intention to reclaim what was yours, I leave that judgment to our viewers. But Dr. Subramanian Swamy, I do thank you for joining us. Let's open this up to all of our other guests. Vishnu Jain, advocate, who's also the advocate of one of the petitioners, as I mentioned earlier in this case. Advocate Ehtesham Hashmi is a political analyst. Gurdeep Singh Sapal of the Congress Party. Dr. Geeta Bhatt, academician, leans towards the RSS. Vinod Bansal of the VHP. And Maulana Masoodul Hasan Kazmi, Islamic scholar, all joining us on the show. Vishnu, I'm coming to you first up. You heard what Subramanian Swamy said. He believes that you need not reopen the wounds of all of those tens of thousands of temples. Let's focus on the bigger fights where, by larger belief and faith, you cannot build the temple elsewhere, like in Ayodhya. Why open up all 40,000 cases or open up the gates for all 40,000 cases to come to court? How would you respond to that? Because his position is different than yours.
I completely disagree with what Mr. Swamy is saying, because we have to follow strict legal principles. Now, if one reads the judgment of the Supreme Court in Ram Mandir's case, para 116 and 117 of the judgment of the Ram Mandir case, it specifically says that the right and the legal obligation and the legal entity is bestowed upon the sankalp which is taken to build a temple. So, for example, today I talk about a temple in Dhar. There the situation is very deplorable. The members of the Muslim community are going and spitting on the Havan Kund, and the deities are present there. It's not just the question of building temple on the same spot. It's the question whether the same spot is a temple or not, and whether that temple is used as a mosque. That's the question. Then I'm giving you example of Dhar. Then you see the example of Lakshman Tila in Lucknow. You see the example of Qutub Minar in Delhi. Then you see the example of Taj Mahal. Then you see the example of Krishna Janmabhoomi. You see the example of Kashi and many more. Atala Mandir in Jaunpur and many more. So the point is this. Point is not about restoration of 40,000 or 10,000 or 5,000. Point is that the Hindu law has to prevail, and the Sanatan Hindu law is, which is recognized by B.K. Mukherjee as well as P.V. Karne in 7 volumes of Dharma Shastra, who was a Bharat Ratna. He has specifically said that if there is a temple in the past, for times to come and till the end of the world, that property will always be dedicated to be the property of the temple. Now, how will you discriminate between Ram Mandir and a Shiva temple in Kashi? How will you discriminate between a Mandir in Bhojshala and the Mandir in Ram temple? All the deities have their own identity, own value, and as you rightly said in your question to Mr. Swamy, that let the locals of that area decide. For example, suppose I am a Jain. I come from Allahabad. For me, my Kul Devta is my Tirthankar, and if my temple is destroyed, then someone will say that, all right, this is one of those 40,000, let bygones be bygones, forget it. The point is this, that's why I'm talking about legal principles. The legal principle is that if you have demolished a Hindu temple, it has to be restored. And no Muslim scholar in the world can say that he can build a mosque over destruction of a Hindu temple. Because as per the Islamic law, to build a mosque, waqf is essential, and the waqf can only be done if it is
and yet
your
we
own
see
property.
that all Muslim organizations
property,
continue to fight for those sites. That's a separate argument why this happens, because you're right. All Muslim scholars say you cannot destroy any place of worship and build your masjid there. But you're saying then that either this act goes completely, there is no midway that Mr. Swamy is talking about, that you make an exemption for Kashi and Mathura after Ayodhya. This act goes completely or it stays completely?
The point is this. If you will see the entire act, we have not challenged Section 3 of the Places of Worship Act. Section 3 of the Places of Worship Act says that after 15th August 1947, no conversion will take place. Now the point is this, Section 4 subclause 2 of the Places of Worship Act 1941 says that you can't approach the court for restoration of a temple, for restoration of a place which existed on 15th August 1947. So we have challenged the constitutional validity of Places of Worship Act, Section 4 subclause 2. And the second aspect, there is discrimination in Section 5 of the Places of Worship Act, where it exempts the movement of Ram temple, where it exempts the proceedings of the Ram temple, but it does not exempt the proceedings of Kashi, Mathura and many more. So the
Okay.
point is this, that if there is a dispute between two communities, it has to be decided by a judicial mechanism. It can't be decided by an act of parliament.
Okay. Gurdeep Singh Sapal, this act of course came into existence under a Congress government, and the allegation is it was basically to calm what the Congress felt were political or communal issues of the time. But was it fundamentally discriminatory, and that too to the majority Hindu community in this country and Indic faiths? Because ultimately temples वगैरह किसके तोड़े गए? Hindus, Buddhists, Jains के तोड़े गए. How can you retrospectively take away the right from them to at least say that this place was my place of worship, and they can go in front of the court of law and say, please listen to our plea? How can that basic right to justice be taken away? Today, would you accept, Gurdeep Singh Sapal, that there is a time to relook at this act?
Thank you, Shivani, and sorry for participating in a debate from a car, because I am participating in this Kanyakumari to Kashmir Padyatra, Bharat Jodo Padyatra. And today we met so many people, 100 people almost I have met. I think people are only talking of Mehengai and Berozgari, unemployment and hatred. I don't think anybody was caring about this case in Supreme Court. But coming back to the Supreme Court case, there are three things that you have been mentioning and your participants have been mentioning. You read out the petition in detail as if the petition was the judgment today.
No, I didn't indicate that at all.
Please allow me to make my point. Allow me to make my point. I would have been thankful on behalf of your viewers if you had read out the judgment of Ram Mandir case, 5-bench judgment which came, which clearly says it's a judgment. It's not a petition that you read out. The Places of Worship Act imposes a non-derogable obligation towards enforcing our commitment to secularism under Indian Constitution. The law is hence a legislative instrument designed to protect the secular feature, which is one of the basic features of Constitution. This is the judgment of Supreme Court only 2 years back.
But sir, I mentioned that this was mentioned in court today, and what the argument against that judgment was. Does this judgment set a precedent or not? That's a legal question.
Please let me complete.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me complete. Please let me complete. You should allow me to make argument. Na? Number one. Number two, there are three things. That the act was passed in an undemocratic manner. That was a minority government of Narasimha Rao. It was debated for 3 days, which is the maximum that any act can be debated in parliament, for 3 days. Now you cannot say that act was debated only 3 days, so it should be cancelled. Last year, Modi government passed 15 acts in 10 minutes. Will you cancel all those acts on that ground? So this ground is not tenable. Second thing, you say it's an arbitrary date. So what should be the date? What is
well, there cannot be a date. Mr. Sapal, that's the argument. Where will you restrict history? And where will you say you can go back only this much and not further?
I'll tell you. Why it's not an arbitrary date. It's a date of Indian independence, when a new nation, new Republic of India came into being, when we became independent. Because if you open the Pandora's box, don't forget, even the Buddhists are claiming that Kanchi and Sri Rangam temples should be demolished to make Buddha Vihar. Is it not the claim by Buddhists today?
If it is, let them go to court.
Please,
let this be fought out. That's the argument.
Please don't shout. Don't shout. I am making an argument. I am telling you, it's not a simple thing of coming at 40,000 temples have been demolished. Who calculated this 40,000 exact?
Well, sir, historians and Archaeological Survey of India have put this number. This is not arbitrary.
Please, Shivani, this is wrong. This is a fake number. It is like the number of 20 lakh crore of BJP given was the money in bank accounts in foreign countries. Before 2014,
come on, don't make this political, sir. Many historians, including Sitaram Goyal and Archaeological Survey of India under the British at that time, have put the number, the figure of temples destroyed in India to tens of thousands. You can quibble over 30,000 or 40,000.
Please let me complete.
Okay, finish quickly, please.
Please, that 20 lakh crore black money was a task force formed of Ajit Doval, who's the NSA for last 8 years, and Lal Krish Advani ji. So it was also a committee. It was a fake committee. Today government says, no, we do not know where is the black money. Similarly, this is the 40,000 temple figure. It's a fake figure.
Okay, what is the accurate figure according to you?
So please tell me. How did 20 lakh crore black money come
Sir,
into
that's a
public
separate
discourse?
argument. Please don't get into
No,
that.
it is
Let's
not.
stick to the
This
subject.
is an argument that
So I'm asking you, I'm sure you are not denying, I'm sure you are not denying that thousands of temples were destroyed in India. What is the figure that seems reasonable to you? Please you tell me.
BJP forms these fake committees to bring up numbers.
This is
like
not a
20 lakh
BJP
crore in
committee,
black
sir.
money,
These are
like
figures from
40,000
Archaeological
crore.
Survey of
No,
India.
no.
That maintain
Please
these
forget.
figures pre-independence
Tell
and
me one
post-independence
single report.
also.
No,
Don't make
there
this
is no
political, sir. That's
official
really,
report.
no, that's
There is
unfortunate,
no-
and that's doing, that's
Shivani,
being
please
really
don't be
economical
guided
with
by-
the truth and
please
injustice
don't
to the
be-
issue at
Shivani,
hand.
Shivani,
All
please
your
don't be
other
guided by
arguments I
fake
take.
reports.
Vishnu wanted to come in very quickly.
Please don't be
Where
guided
has
by
this
fake
number come
reports.
from, Vishnu?
Please
Very
tell
quickly,
your
then I have to go to our
viewers
other
that
guest, Vishnu.
Supreme Court in Ram Mandir case gave a different judgment.
Yes, I'll take that point to others. I'll take that point to others. Vishnu, very quickly.
The judgment of Supreme Court has changed.
Okay.
It doesn't mean the judgment of
See,
Supreme
first
Court.
of all, my friend was arguing about Ram Mandir judgment. Let me tell him that in Ram Mandir judgment, places of worship act was not under challenge. It was not an issue. It was not argued by anyone. And if the judgment has come like that, it's an arbiter judgment. There's a legal maxim under the under the jurisprudence that if something is not an issue, and on that if Supreme Court or the High Court passes any remarks, that's an arbiter finding. That's not a binding precedent. We have precisely said so before the Honorable Supreme Court, and the Honorable Chief Justice said that this is a matter which has to be gone into and decided by a three-judge
In any
bench.
case,
So
now
this
the
is
court has
precisely
agreed
the
to review
contours on
it, so
which
that matter
the
does not
arguments are-
arise.
Correct. Now, number two, my friend was saying from where the figures come. Now, there are many books of many historians. Mr. Sitaram Goel's books is there. There are many archaeologists who have written the book where these figures find place. Now, the point is not about 30,000 or 40,000. The point is that wherever we'll find evidence that a temple has been destroyed, we will gather the facts and we have the right to approach the court.
Okay,
now,
fair
what
enough.
is the problem,
Vishnu?
as you rightly said, that if someone can't take the court,
No, anybody can. Then it opens up to anybody. Yes. If it is Buddhist, Sikh, if it is Christians,
Correct.
if it is Muslims, if they
Yes,
believe
yes,
their site
yes.
has been harmed,
door
which was historically theirs, then anybody can go to court. This is not going to be a Hindu specific law. It's going to be religion agnostic. Let me
Correct,
go across to
correct.
Vinod
Yeah.
Bansal of VHP.
Yes.
लेकिन एक argument Vinod Bansal ji ये भी है that why not focus on the larger temples where you cannot build the temples anywhere else because of the faith attached with that spot of land. As Subramanian Swami was saying, why open this up to 40,000 or 50,000 temples? Because that's you will never be able to do justice to all of those cases anyways.
He said 40,000, not 50.
No, it's not a matter of number actually. Shivani, you just try to understand the basic logic of all those things. Why the people has forced to gone to the court? Why this majority community of the country is approaching the court to save their own temples? It is the history in the world. You never find anywhere in the world that this majority community suffered by the act of the so-called minority community. Number one. Number two is that you never find any of the any constitution of the world which give the rights to the only minorities like Article 29 and 30, which has never been allowed to the majority communities as such. Number three is that you see, if you go through the past 75 years of the post-independence era, you will find that the Congress has always made the policy in such a way कि हिंदुओं को दोयम दर्जे का नागरिक बना दो, और on the same lines मुस्लिम अपीजमेंट की पॉलिसी उनको पर इतनी हावी हो गई कि चाहे वो कुछ भी करा उसको सबको इग्नोर कर दो. आप देखिए कि अगर राइट टू जस्टिस है तो अगर किसी को उनको है तो मुझे भी है भाई. I also have the right to protect my faith. I also have the right to make the things good for the wrongs which have been done by the earlier the rulers or some this intruders. आप देखिए कि शिवानी जी, अगर मुझे कोई राइट है, आपको कोई राइट है, वो तो राइट है. अब मेरा राइट है तो कुछ नहीं है. आप मुझे बताइए कि आखिरकार किसको नहीं पता कि हजारों, बल्कि मैं कहता हूँ लाखों मंदिरों को तोड़ा गया, वहां के मॉन्यूमेंट्स को डिस्ट्रॉय करके उसके ऊपर कई को सुपर स्ट्रक्चर बना दिया, किसी को धराशायी कर दिया, कुछ किया. कौन नहीं जानता? दुनिया का कोई व्यक्ति इसको स्वीकार करने को तैयार नहीं है. कभी ऐसा नहीं हुआ.
फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल मैं एक चीज बोल देती हूँ विनोद जी, डिनायल तो मैं बिल्कुल एक्सेप्ट नहीं करूंगी. अगर कोई ये आर्गुमेंट डिसमिस कर रहा है कि हजारों टेंस ऑफ थाउजेंड टेंपल इंडिया में डिस्ट्रॉय किए गए हैं, वो मैं नहीं एक्सेप्ट करूंगी. वो नहीं है. That is denial of history, and it is time to end that in the denial of history. तो वो आर्ग्यूमेंट तो है ही नहीं, ये सबको पता है. जो भी इंडिया में 30-40 साल रहा होगा, उसने अपने गले मोहल्ले में भी देखा होगा, अपने लोकल सिटी में भी देखा होगा, कोई ना कोई टेंपल मिल जाएगा जिस पे अटैक हुआ है, या तो वो पार्शियली डिस्ट्रॉयड है या फुली डिस्ट्रॉयड है. तो ये तो हमारी लिव्ड हिस्ट्री है, रिकॉर्डेड हिस्ट्री है, इसमें तो कोई चैलेंज ही नहीं है.
नहीं शिवानी जी, मैं वही कह रहा हूँ. देखिए, जो बात आप कह रही हैं और आपके पैनलिस्ट कह रहे हैं, उस बात को कांग्रेस मानने को तैयार नहीं होती. उसको सेकुलर ब्रिगेड जो देश की है, they are not going to accept this fact of the case. आप देखिए कि इतना सब कुछ होने के बावजूद भी हिंदुओं के ऊपर कितने अत्याचार हुए, हिस्ट्री की किताबों में साफ साफ दर्ज है. चाहे बाबर से लेकर के हुमायूं और ये जितने भी लोग हैं, आप देखिए कि माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी पिछले स्वतंत्रता दिवस के भाषण में उन्होंने कहा था कि हमें गुलामी के प्रतीकों को ढहाना है
जी, और ये भी गुलामी का प्रतीक है. नहीं, ये सही बात है, क्योंकि ये आर्ग्यूमेंट मैं गीता भट्ट के पास लेके जाऊंगी. बट मैंने आपसे सवाल किया था विनोद बंसल जी की क्या आप 3 साइट में खुश रहेंगे, क्योंकि आरएसएस ने भी एक बार ये बोला है, वीएचपी टाइप ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस. अब मुझे नहीं पता आपका क्या व्यू है, अब क्या सिर्फ काशी मथुरा अयोध्या से बात बन सकती है?
देखिए, जब काशी मथुरा अयोध्या की बात की थी तब ये लोग सब तलवार लेके खड़े हो गए थे, और भगवान श्री राम को स्वयं कोर्ट में जाकर के लड़ना पड़ा. अब दुनिया के अंदर कोई एक रिलीजन दिखा दीजिए जिनका रिलीजियस हीरो या जो गॉड है वो स्वयं कोर्ट के अंदर लड़ रहा है.
नहीं, आप मेरे सवाल का जवाब दीजिए ना. आप 3 से मान जाएंगे या आप चाहते हैं कि पूरा मामला खुलना चाहिए, पूरा एक्ट ही जाना चाहिए?
देखिए, इसमें विनोद बंसल या शिवानी गुप्ता अकेले को डिसाइड नहीं कर सकते. इट्स अ मैटर ऑफ द फेथ रिलेटेड टू द लार्जर सेक्शन ऑफ द सोसाइटी. द सोसाइटी हैज टू डिसाइड क्या आगे करना है. अभी विश्व हिंदू परिषद की अगर आप बात करती हैं तो विश्व हिंदू परिषद का भी मत है, अपने पूज्य संतों ने कहा है कि जब तक राम जन्मभूमि की शिखर पताका नहीं लहराई जाती तब तक हमें दूसरा कोई केस अभी नहीं आगे बढ़ना. लेकिन बात यह कि हिंदू समाज के ऊपर जो बार बार आक्रमण हुए, बार बार उसको झेलना पड़ा, और आज भी हिंदू समाज वो तथाकथित अल्पसंख्यक समुदाय के प्रताड़ना का शिकार हो रहा है. वो कब तक चलेगा आखिर?
Okay, Mr. Suppal, do you want to respond to that? And this is a concept everywhere in the world, that these sites, any country that attains independence or moves from one era to another, sites which were of historical destruction or subjugation, they are reclaimed because they are a reminder to the public of the wrongs that were done in the past. What's wrong if the Hindus want to reclaim these sites? जी, सपल जी को एक बार respond करने दीजिए.
I was hearing intently. A case was being made that they have a right to God, we do not have a right to go to court. Let me tell you, the constitution that Congress party placed before this country, which has been ruling this country, on which basis the country is being ruled for last 75 years, gives equal rights to everyone. Now the BJP, which
if the rights are equal to
please,
all citizens
I
of
did
the
not
country, then
intervene.
how could you say that the Muslims has the supreme rights over the resources of the country?
It is BJP which is now talking of our rights versus their rights. Number one. Let us understand. It's a country of great diversity which was stable in last 25 years because everybody had equal rights. It is not appeasement. Everybody has equal rights. Please, let me complete. Let me complete. बोलने से कुछ नहीं होगा.
एक सेकंड, अब विनोद जी उनको बोलने दीजिए, उनको अपनी बात रखने दीजिए.
You make a point. Number 2, you said reclaiming the past. Yes, we did this exercise in Constituent Assembly where we decided whatever past in which people used to fight with each other is a thing of past. Now we will have fraternity in this country. We will have equal rights.
1991 में आया. 1991 में क्या circumstances थे जिसकी वजह से ये आया?
Undoing the history is wrong is that we will not commit the same mistakes. Undoing is not that we will commit the same mistakes because they were committed.
No, they're not the same mistakes. Destroying something and reclaiming what was destroyed is not the same act, sir. I oppose that.
You have a very different view from me.
Yeah, we disagree on this. We disagree on this.
You have to allow me to speak.
Sir, I have 2 guests who haven't spoken. Let me take their view. I'll come back to you if I can. Advocate Ehtasham Hashmi is joining us. You're an advocate yourself, Ehtasham. What do you make of the arguments that have been presented in court and the fact that the Supreme Court has indeed decided to look into it by a 3-judge bench? Is it not time to review this act for fairness to everybody?
Thank you so much for inviting me on this debate. And I just want to say that as a lawyer, that why Place of Worship Act was enacted. I think no one, and neither young lawyer, my friend Vishnu Shankar Jain and Bansal ji, has read the Place of Worship Act and Constitution of India in correct perspective. I can cite 1,000 examples where Mughal emperors have donated fortune to temples. And one thing which I would like to request with all the viewers and all the panelists and all Indians, so please don't equate Indian Muslims with Mughals. What Mughals have done, it's a part of history. What we have to do is is about future of our nation. I think we should discuss about economy, education, empowerment, women empowerment, and for the development of society. And let me make my point. This act is enacted with the sole intention to prevent disharmony in the society. I am just requesting that we should not destroy the harmony of the society, and the statutory object of the act is to prevent disturbance of public order and maintenance of peace and tranquility and strengthen the basic feature of secularism.
मैं आप ही की बात का थोड़ा आगे बता रही हूँ, आपको मैं मौका दूंगी। एक सेकंड, आपने बोला आज के जो मुसलमान हैं उनको मुगल से मत इक्वेट कीजिए, आपने बिल्कुल सही बात करी, लेकिन आप ये भी कह रहे हैं कि अगर ये एक्ट चला जाएगा तो लॉ एंड ऑर्डर सिचुएशन हो जाएगी, या इन साइट्स को रिक्लेम किया जाएगा तो लॉ एंड ऑर्डर कम्युनल डिसहार्मनी हो जाएगी। ये दोनों बातें एक साथ क्यों? आज के मुसलमान को क्यों फर्क पड़ना चाहिए? जो बाबर ने किया, जो औरंगजेब ने किया, उसको क्यों नहीं ठीक कर सकते?
See, we are not connected to Mughals in any way. But yes, the religious structure and mosques which are situated in India, Indian Muslims are quite connected to those structures.
Even Babar's structure after demolishing Kashi.
Or let me, Shivani, please allow me to make my point. Actually, I am sitting since last 35 minutes. I am just requesting 2 minutes.
एहतशाम हाशमी जी, आप कंप्लीट करिए, फिर विष्णु जैन।
land to ancient. Thank you so much, Shivani. Thank you so much. So kind of you. Aurangzeb offered lavish grant and land to ancient Someshwar temple, and Aurangzeb donated land for more than 400 temples. So may I ask my learned friends who are appearing for BJP, can they return those grants? Can they return those grants back to Mughals and to Muslims if they are equating Indian Muslims with Mughals and demolishing the Muslims?
किसको रिटर्न करें? एक सेकंड विष्णु जी, एक सेकंड, रिटर्न किसको करें? रिटर्न किसको करें बताइए?
To whom they ever want?
हाँ, तो मुगलों के जो डिसेंडेंट्स हैं, हाशमी जी, मुगलों के जो डिसेंडेंट्स हैं, वो अगर कोर्ट में जाके बोलते हैं कि हमें ये पैसा वापस कर दीजिए, तो कोर्ट में जा सकते हैं।
अगर मुगल से इतनी प्रॉब्लम है इनको, तो जो मुगलों से इन्होंने भीख ली है उसको वापस कर दें फिर। क्यों हाथ में रखे हुए हैं?
हाशमी जी, अब आप भीख पे मत आइए,
को मुगल से कोई प्यार नहीं है।
अब भीख किसी ने नहीं ली, अब आप भीख पे मत आइए, अब आप अपना टोन थोड़ा सा संभाल लीजिए।
इंडियन मुस्लिम
आप मजाक कर रहे हैं कि भारत में रहने वाले हिंदुओं ने फॉरेनर से भीख ली है? अगर ये व्यू रखेंगे तो फिर तो लड़ाई होगी।
ये जो लॉयर्स है ना, जो बीजेपी के पपेट्स हैं, इनको कहने की जरूरत है कि इनको थोड़ा सा संविधान के दायरे में रहकर काम करना चाहिए।
बीजेपी और अपने टोन एंड टेलर पे थोड़ा कंट्रोल कीजिए। विष्णु जैन,
मैं एक बात कहना चाहता हूं, यहाँ पे एहतशाम भाई ने कहा, शिवानी जी, एहतशाम आर्ग्यूड दैट दे हैव नो सर एक मिनट, देखिए मैं आपके लेवल पे नहीं जाना चाहता हूं। आई जस्ट आर्ग्यू विद द एंकर, आई टेल माय सबमिशंस टू द एंकर, आई डोंट वांट टू। आप
आ भी नहीं सकते मेरे लेवल पे, आप आ भी नहीं सकते मेरे लेवल पे, भी बहुत सीखना है आपको।
ठीक है, अरे ठीक है सर,
आप अपने जो मास्टर्स हैं उनके लिए काम करो, उनके पपेट्स बन के काम करो। आप विष्णु शंकर जैन,
अरे उनके कोई भी मास्टर है, उनका अधिकार है देश में अपना काम करना। आप कौन होते हैं डिक्टेट करने वाले?
दिस काइंड ऑफ रिस्पेक्ट, I am not going to tolerate this kind of disrespect.
Disrespect तो आप सबकी कर रहे हैं,
बीजेपी के नेताओं के। यहाँ पे तमीज से बात
हो रहे हैं कि आपकी डिसरिस्पेक्ट हो रही है।
तमीज से बात करने की जरूरत है। शिवानी, this is not the way to conduct the debate. शिवानी, I am extremely sorry.
पपेट और ये और बोल रहे हैं, आप बोल रहे हैं हिंदुओं ने भीख ली है मुगलों से, और आप चौड़े हो रहे हैं और कह रहे हैं कि आपकी डिसरिस्पेक्ट हो रही है।
हाँ मैं बोलूंगा क्यों भीख ली है?
आपको बोलने दिया, अब आप ये मत बोलिए कि डिसरिस्पेक्ट नहीं टॉलरेट करेंगे। What you can give, learn to take it also. Anyways,
मुसलमान को टारगेट करोगे? शर्म आनी
नहीं,
चाहिए।
मुसलमानों को किसी ने नहीं टारगेट किया। आप प्लीज अपने थोड़ी जबान पे थोड़ा सा कंट्रोल रखिए। विष्णु जैन 2 मिनट्स कर आपके गो टू मौलाना मसूद
also। क्यों नहीं फिर आपने मंदिर बनाने के लिए नहीं लेते? अपने पैसे से मंदिर बनाते।
भीख किसी ने नहीं ली भाई साहब, हिस्ट्री पढ़ लीजिए। भीख किसी ने नहीं ली।
शिवानी,
जिनकी जगह पे
शिवानी,
मुगलों ने आके
औरंगजेब
राज
ने
किया
हजारों करोड़
और
रुपए
जिनको
मंदिरों को
दबाने
दिया
की
है,
कोशिश
उसका
करी
क्या
वो
करेंगे?
भिखारी होंगे, हिंदू भिखारी नहीं थे उस समय के। जो इन्वेडर हैं उनको आप
शिवानी
ये
जी,
मत
हिंदू
दिखाइए
वो
कि
थे।
बहुत उन्होंने वरदान दे दिया। विष्णु जैन 1 मिनट प्लीज।
शिवानी जी, एहतशाम भाई ने कहा कि इनका मुगलों से कोई रिलेशन नहीं है। मैं एक बात कहना चाहता हूं और पूछना चाहता हूं बड़ी संजीदगी से कि जब काशी की पूरा केस चल रहा था तो आपको पता है मुस्लिम पक्ष ने क्या डॉक्यूमेंट दिखाए कोर्ट में? मस्जिद आलमगिरी का डॉक्यूमेंट दिखाया और कहा इसको हमारे बादशाह औरंगजेब ने बनाया, इसलिए मस्जिद हमको दी जाए और ये औरंगजेब ने वफ किया है। तो अगर मुगलों से कोई रिलेशन नहीं था तो औरंगजेब ने जो वफ किया है, सो कॉल्ड वफ किया, उसको हमने डिस्प्यूट किया, सो कॉल्ड वफ किया, तो उससे अपना टाइटल क्यों डिराइव किया? पहली बात। दूसरी बात, इन्होंने कहा कि हिंदुओं ने मुगलों से भीख ली है। मैं पहली बात इस बात का बहुत स्ट्रांगली कंडेम करता हूं। ये बहुत डेरोगेटरी वर्ड्स है
बिल्कुल
इस
है।
देश के बहुसंख्यक समाज के अगेंस्ट। और साथ ही साथ
और
मैं
नहीं,
ये कहना
बहुसंख्यक
चाहता हूं
की
कि
बात नहीं है,
जजिया
विष्णु
हमने
जैन।
इनको दिया था,
जिसकी
अपना
जमीन
धर्म,
थी, ये भारत
अपना
जिसका
धर्म
था,
हमने नहीं छोड़ा था
उसको-
शिवानी जी।
नहीं, जिसकी जमीन थी, जिसका देश था, उस पे आपने अटैक करके बाहर से आके अटैक करके उस जमीन को हथियाया, फिर वही पैसा अगर आपने दे भी दिया 4-5 मंदिरों को तो
मंदिर
वो भीख हो
तोड़े।
जाती है क्या?
और हमारे मंदिर तोड़े, हमारे साथ यहाँ पे जजिया लगाया, दीवालों में चुना गया, आरे से काटा गया, और आज उन सबको भूल के जब हम अपने मंदिरों के रेस्टोर की बात कर रहे हैं तो एहतशाम जी कहते हैं कि हमने भीख दी, मुगलों ने भीख दी, और दो मुंह ही बात करते हैं, कहते हैं कि हमारा मुगलों से कोई रिलेशन नहीं है। तो पॉइंट यही है कि आज के देश का जो इंडियन मुसलमान है उनका अपना सारा क्लेम जो मुगलों ने यहाँ पे आक्रांताएं की हैं, जो बर्बरता की है, उन्हीं से डिराइव कर रहे हैं। और जब उसका उजागर कर रहे हैं तो कह रहे नहीं नहीं उनसे हमारा कोई क्लेम नहीं है,
Okay,
उनसे हमारा
fair
कोई
enough.
रिलेशन नहीं है, और सारे रिलेशन उन्हीं से निकाल रहे हैं, सारे रिलेशन
नहीं,
उन्हीं से
ये
निकाल
तो-
रहे हैं। आप मुगलों को ग्लोरीफाई कर रहे हैं। आपने आज मैं एक बात कहना चाहता हूं, एहतशाम भाई मुझे 50 बातें बोलते, मुझे कोई बुरा नहीं लगता, पर उन्होंने जो ये शब्द प्रयोग किया
नहीं, गलत
कि
किया है।
हिंदुओं ने मुगलों से भीख ली, मैं इस शब्द को बहुत डेरोगेटरी मानता हूं, पूरे बहुसंख्यक समाज
और
के लिए
यही
बहुत
view है।
डेरोगेटरी मानता हूं।
नहीं, और
मैं-
यही दिक्कत है।
शिवानी जी मैं एक बात कह रहा हूं, मैं अपने आप को कंट्रोल कर रहा हूं। आज मैं कोई ऐसी बात नहीं बोल रहा हूं कि इस देश में लॉ एंड ऑर्डर प्रॉब्लम हो, बस मैं अपनी बात को कंट्रोल कर रहा हूं, पर मैं कह रहा हूं बहुत डेरोगेटरी बात की इन्होंने।
बिल्कुल करिए, ये बात एक्सेप्टेबल नहीं है और यही दिक्कत फैलाता है मौलाना मसूद जी। यही जो एटीट्यूड है ना कि हमने तो भीख में दे दिया था। आप बताइए भारत जैसे देश में क्या ये एक्सेप्टेबल होगा? क्या हिस्ट्री नहीं पता हमें कि किसने भीख ली, किसने यहां से कमाया और बाहर भेजा? और मैं आपसे सीधा सवाल पूछती हूँ मौलाना जी, ये एक फंडामेंटल सवाल है भारतीय मुसलमानों के सामने, आज के मुसलमानों के सामने, कि आप उन औरंगजेब और बाबर के साथ खड़ा होकर दिखना चाहते हैं या अपने हिंदू भाई बहनों के साथ दिखना चाहते हैं? ये सवाल है और वो इस मैटर्स में उजागर होता है। मैं मानती हूँ आपकी भी आस्था है, लेकिन कुछ साइट्स इतनी इंपॉर्टेंट रही है हिंदुओं के लिए और सबको पता है कि उनको तोड़ा गया है, भाईचारे से हो सकता था।
शिवानी, हमारा, लेट मी क्लेरिफाई दैट, मुगलों से, इन्वेडर्स से आज के मुस्लिम्स का कोई लेना देना नहीं है इंडियन मुस्लिम से। वी हैव नथिंग टू डू विद इन्वेडर्स, वी हैव नथिंग टू डू विद मुगल्स। हमारा कलर, हमारा रंग, हमारा ब्लड हमारे हिंदू भाइयों की तरह है, हमारे वंशज भी उन्हीं में से हैं, उनके वंशज भी हमारे में से ही हैं। तो ये कहना कि भीख मांग ली है तो भीख तो हम भी आ गए, हिंदू भी आ गए, मुसलमान भी आ गए, हम ये वर्ड बिल्कुल भी इस्तेमाल नहीं करना चाहते। हमारा पॉइंट सिर्फ ये है कि टुडे व्हेन कंट्री इज फेसिंग जॉब इश्यूज, हेल्थ केयर इश्यूज, अदर डेवलपमेंटल इश्यूज, वी शुड नॉट इंडल्ज इन द हिंदू मुस्लिम. We should not further polarize our country. We should not fight in on Hindu-Muslim issues. Let court decide, and we have an act, very wonderful act, Places of Worship Act 1991, that states that the character of all the religious character of spiritual places will remain unchanged. What was unchanged? What was on the date of independence? August 15, 1947. So this act is very instrumental, designed to protect the secular feature of our
But sir,
India.
एक बात बताइए
of
मौलाना
our
काज़मी,
country.
अब तो
If
ये
you
एक्ट
abolish
रिव्यू हो रहा
this
है,
act,
लीगल
if you
आर्ग्यूमेंट्स जो होंगी, हिस्टोरिकल आर्ग्यूमेंट्स जो होंगी, वो कोर्ट में भी होगी. लेकिन मैं आपसे एक सवाल पूछ रही हूँ, आप कह रहे हैं कि इस एक्ट की वजह से सेक्युलर नेचर बना हुआ है इस देश में, जो 1991 में आया था.
Of course.
मतलब उससे पहले हम सेक्युलर नहीं थे, सेक्युलर
देखिए,
नेचर नहीं था.
आप ये समझिए, no, there you are opening a floodgate of a lot of the masjid mandir issues.
हाँ, ये बात तो मैं मानती हूँ. अब फ्लडगेट में भी ओपन.
Mandirs, thousands of masjid, thousands of church will not be safe in this country. And there will be no place of except Hindu Muslim की लड़ाई के अलावा. हमारी इस देश की दुनिया में कितनी बदनामी हो रही है कि हमने डेवलपमेंटल इश्यू छोड़ दिए, हमने जॉब के इश्यू छोड़ दिए, हमने प्यार और मोहब्बत के इश्यू छोड़ दिए और हिंदू मुस्लिम में हम लगे पड़े हैं. हमारी बदनामी पूरी दुनिया में हो रही है, इसकी तरफ हम नहीं सोचते.
बदनामी तो कोई नहीं हो रही.
तमाम पॉलिटिकल
इंडिया की
लीडर
तो
से कह रहा हूं.
डेवलपमेंट की भी बहुत वाहवाही हो रही है, तो उस पे नहीं जाना चाहिए. जो हमारे मुद्दे हैं हमें खुद सॉल्व करने चाहिए. आई हैव रन आउट ऑफ टाइम. आई विल गिव विनोद बंसल 20 seconds and विष्णु जैन द फाइनल वर्ड. यस विनोद बंसल 20 seconds प्लीज.
शिवानी जी देखिए, वो जो दो ही बातें हैं कि हम उनके वंशज भी नहीं है और उनकी बात को प्रोटेक्ट करेंगे. दूसरी बात ये कि ये जो कह रहे हैं कि प्लेसेस ऑफ वर्शिप एक्ट, अरे भैया जो हिस्टोरिकल रॉन्ग्स हैं उनको ठीक कौन करेगा आखिरकार. और जब आपका उनसे कोई रिश्ता नहीं है तो फिर बलवा किसका. आप ये जो आपकी सांप्रदायिक सौहार्द बिगड़ने की भावना क्यों खराब हो रही है भाई, क्योंकि आप उनसे अटैच होना चाहते हैं. और तीसरी बात ये कि जिस तरह से ये हाशमी ने बोला, वी डू हैव स्ट्रांग ऑब्जेक्शन टू इट. ऐसे व्यक्ति को देश के बहुसंख्यक हिंदू समाज से माफी मांगनी चाहिए, अविलंब माफी मांगनी चाहिए. ये जिस तरह से बातें कहा है इन्होंने, एक तो एडवोकेट होकर के इन्होंने जिस भाषा का प्रयोग किया है वो इन्होंने अपनी संस्कृति के दर्शन करा दिए.
Ideally, these matters could have been solved post-independence, but it is our history that it just wasn't, and you cannot keep it buried beyond a point. But Vishnu Jain, I'll give you final 20 seconds to talk about the floodgates that may be opened. Is that also not a real concern?
See, this is not a real concern because ultimately all the matters will travel to the civil court of various districts, and the civil court on its own facts of each case will examine the religious character of the property in question. So there is no question of opening of the floodgates. The matter will travel to the judicial scrutiny. It is not that if today Places of Worship Act is repealed, tomorrow everything will be given to the members of the Hindu community or the vice versa. It will only lead to disputes before the court of law, which is a constitutional mechanism, and the courts of law will decide whether this dispute has a merit or not.
All right, fair enough. I've run out of time. Now this matter is before the Supreme Court 3-judge bench. Let's see how it goes. There's already that Gyanvapi issue which is already in court, and a lot of these proceedings can have an impact on each other. I thank our guests for joining us. Time for a very short break. On the other side, we'll get to the day's biggest story.